Hello students, myself Monotosh Dey, your English helpline on the go. Today I shall discuss a lesson from First Flight which is taught in CBSE curriculum of Standard 10. The lesson under discussion today is Nelson Mandela-A Long Walk to Freedom, written by Mandela himself. Before we begin, let me throw some light on the theme of the story, which will be followed by story sequence and recapitulation. So let's begin. Nelson Mandela has become South Africa's first black president after more than 3 centuries of white rule. Mandela's African National Congress Party won 252 of the 400 seats in the first democratic elections of South Africa's history. The inauguration ceremony took place in the Union Building Amphitheatre in Pretoria, attended by politicians and dignitaries from more than 140 countries around the world. More than 100,000 South African men, women, and children of all races sang and danced with joy at the inauguration ceremony of Nelson Mandela. Now, let's switch on to the theme. This chapter has been taken from Nelson Mandela's book, Nelson Mandela-A Long Walk to Freedom. The chapter describes his fight for the freedom for his own people who were exploited by whites. In the chapter, Mandela throws light on 2 contradictory pictures of his own country. Firstly, the blacks were tortured and suffered quietly, and secondly, the blacks were free to live the life of their own. Now, let's move on to the story sequence. First is inauguration ceremony. On 10th May, Nelson Mandela was sworn in as the first black president of South Africa. It was after years of struggle that his anti-racist party came to power. Until then, the seat had always been occupied by white presidents. Therefore, the author referred to the day as bright and clear. It was a morning full of hope. It was a historic day as so many international leaders came together for the inauguration ceremony. The inauguration ceremony took place in the Union Buildings Amphitheatre in Pretoria. Nelson Mandela was sworn in as the first black president of South Africa on 10th May 1994. The author was accompanied by his daughter Zenani on the historic day. Mr. de Klerk first took the oath as the second deputy president, followed by Mr. Thabo Mbeki, who swore as the first deputy president of South Africa. His government promised to free everyone from existing poverty, hardships, and inequalities, where not a single individual or citizen will be considered inferior. After the oath-taking ceremony, South African jets displayed the military power. It also showed the loyalty of military to democracy. The 2 national anthems were also sung. The whites sang their national anthem, the old song, and the blacks also sang the new song, which marked the end of the ceremony. He says that is, Mandela says that the policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound on his country and its people. His government, therefore, would recognize the rights and freedom of all the people. Mandela regretted the sacrifices of thousands of people who tried to get freedom from discrimination. He is the sum of all those African patriots who sacrificed their lives before him. He recalled great freedom fighters like Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Chief Luthuli, Yusuf Dadoo, etc., who showed with their works uncommon courage and generosity. South Africa is rich in minerals, but its greatest wealth is its people. His government promised to remove existing poverty, hardships, and inequalities, where no community will be considered inferior. Mandela says that every man has two obligations. Obligations to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children, and he has an obligation to his people as well, his community, his country. But in countries like South Africa, it was never so easy. Whenever a person of color, that is black people, would come up for his society, he would be arrested and taken away from his family, thus keeping them from fulfilling both responsibilities. In the beginning, Mandela did not put his people over his family, but it was only later when he realized that in order to be there for his people, he was compromising his duties towards his own family. The author did not have the plan to stand against the apartheid system early in his life. He lived his childhood like any other normal child in South Africa. He had to follow the rules set up by his father. At first, as a student, he wanted freedom only for himself. The transitory freedoms of being able to stay out at night, read what he pleased, and go where he chose. Later, as a young man in Johannesburg, he yearned for the basic and honorable freedoms, for achieving his potential of earning his keep, of marrying and having a family, the freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful country. It was not just his freedom that was curtailed, but the freedom of his community, people. So he decided to join the African National Congress, and that is when the hunger for his own freedom became the greater hunger for the freedom of his people. It was this fire that changed the author completely as a man, from being scared to brave, a lawyer to the one breaking the law, a family man to a man without a home, and a lively man into being a monk. Mandela thought that the chains on anyone from his community were the chains on all of them, and the chains on his community were the chains on him as well. It was this desire for the freedom of people to live their lives with dignity and self-respect that animated Mandela's life all throughout. Now let's recapitulate. The story begins with the description of inaugural ceremony of Nelson Mandela, which took place on the 10th of May 1994. In the first decade of the 20th century, the white government introduced the system of apartheid and exploited the black population. The author expressed his desire to thank all those freedom fighters who couldn't leave this historic occasion. He referred to the citizens as the greatest asset of the country. Mandela believes that courageous person is not the one who is fearless, but the man who has overcome fear. He also mentioned the twin obligations of every citizen and how this obligation towards his family was neglected while fulfilling his obligation towards the society. It was this desire for the freedom of his people to live their life with dignity and self-respect that animated Mandela's life. Then Mandela goes on to say, the oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. Dear students, now let's discuss some of the difficult lines from the text. As you can see on the right side of your screen, the highlighted parts will be discussed by me now. So first highlighted part, as you can see, Nelson Mandela has become South Africa's first black president after more than 3 centuries of white rule. Mr. Mandela's African National Congress Party won 252 of the 400 seats in the first democratic elections in South Africa's history. So dear students, Nelson Mandela belongs to South Africa. He was the first black president of South Africa after more than 300 years of white rule. He belonged to a political party called African National Congress. Now on the right side of your screen, as you can see, first we'll discuss about newborn liberty, the highlighted parts you see, then human disaster. So dear students, what is newborn liberty and human disaster all about? Let's discuss. Mandela means to say that In the esteemed presence of all international and national dignitaries, they have achieved glory of newborn liberty. Newborn liberty is the formation of new democracy under the leadership of Mandela. Now let's discuss about human disaster. Out of 300 years of discrimination, tortured by white rule, and millions of human sacrifices, was born a society which everybody will be proud of. Okay, so human disaster here refers to the discrimination, the torture, the suffering that the black people over the last 300 years, okay, suffered, okay, in the hands of the white government. That is what is referred to as human disaster. Now let's move on to common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. It is a common victory for all the citizens of South Africa for justice, peace, and human beings. Next highlighted part, you see, political emancipation. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. Mandela claims that they have finally achieved political freedom. Emancipation means political freedom, and the new government would liberate all the citizens from the poverty, suffering, and gender discrimination. Citizens will be given their human rights from which they were deprived of earlier under the white government. Now, next highlighted part, you see towards the end of your page. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, let me explain you the meaning of this. Anglo-Boer War refers to the war between the British and the Boer tribe of South Africa, which took place between 1899 and 1902. Mandela means to say that in the first decade of 20th century, after Anglo-Boer War, white-skinned people of South Africa patch up, that is repair or stop temporarily their differences, but set up a system of racial discrimination with black people of the same country. So it's a regret, it's a shame. That is why he is mentioning this fact here. Now, next highlighted part on your screen, I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots. Dear students, it means that here Mandela pays tribute to all those African patriots who had fought for the freedom of black community. Mandela felt sad that he could not thank them as they were dead. He also felt sad that those patriots or freedom fighters could not be able to see this historic day, which is born out of their commitments and sacrifices for their country. Next highlighted part, you see, the policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country. The writer means to say that the policy of apartheid had created a lasting injury in South Africa, and many years are needed to heal the wound created by the white power in his community, in his country. Next highlighted part, you see, my country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people. And the Mandela means to say that he speaks high of his countrymen here. He says that his country is rich in minerals, and the greatest wealth is the people of his country. Okay, they are finer and truer than the purest of diamonds. Next highlighted part, you see, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Here Mandela means to say that he talks about courage. Mandela says that courage means a victory over any kind of fear. The brave man is he who conquers any kind of fear. Next highlighted part, you see, people must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Dear students, Mandela makes a philosophical statement here. He says that nobody is born hating another person because of his skin color or his community background. People are taught to hate others. If they are taught to hate, they can also be taught to love, as love comes more naturally to human beings than hatred. Next highlighted part you see, in life every man has twin obligations. Mandela then speaks about twin obligations towards one's family and towards one's community or society he belongs to. Okay, next you see, but in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both those obligations. Mandela means to say that, but in South Africa, a black person cannot carry out his obligations towards his society. If he is found to be doing so, he would be put behind the bars. He would be snatched from his family and forced to live a separate secret life with rebellion. Next highlighted part you see, at first as a student I wanted freedom only for myself, the transitory freedom. Dear students, here Mandela talks about two different types of freedom. Let me discuss about these two types of freedom. Mandela talks about transitory freedom and basic and honorable freedom. Examples are given, you can see in the highlighted part in the second paragraph here. Now third highlighted part you see, I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed. What Mandela means to say by this, Mandela talks about the reason why he joined African National Congress. He joined because with the support of a political party, he can fight for the freedom of his community. That is why he joined African National Congress. Now, as you can see, I knew the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. Mandela said that the oppressor must be liberated as surely as the oppressed. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. Dear students, Mandela means to say that a man who takes away the freedom of another is himself locked in the prison of hatred. If someone is locked in prison of hatred, he can never be considered free. Therefore, an oppressor, that is the white government here, who takes away the freedom of the black people can never be free. Therefore, the white government is also a prisoner of hatred, like the black people who are the prisoner of slavery. Oppressor is himself a prisoner of his narrow mentality. No one is truly free if he is taking away someone else's freedom, as you can see in the highlighted part of your text. What he means to say is that the oppressor is not truly free because he has taken away the freedom of somebody, of the oppressed here. Oppressed means the black community of South Africa. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. It means, dear students, both the white people and the black people are not having the characteristics of humanity. The oppressor is not having humanity because he has taken away the freedom of the black people. On the other hand, the oppressed is not having humanity, as their humanistic feature like love, kindness, forgiveness, etc. has already been snatched or taken away by the oppressor. My dear students, we have come to the conclusion of the discussion of this story. Thank you so much for listening, and if you are new to the channel or if you haven't subscribed to my channel so far, kindly do subscribe to it and press the bell icon for notification of every new video that I upload for you and you alone. Till we meet with another video, bye bye, take care, thank you.